Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Seizing the Moment, What Budget 2025 Means for Community Organizations. We can get started. First, I would like to share a land acknowledgement. My name is Mairead from Tamarack Institute. I'll be helping out with tech today. And for today, our land acknowledgement is Turtle Island, or North America, has been home since time immemorial to ancestors of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We recognize that in this territory, Indigenous rights holders have endured historical oppression and continue to endure inequities that have largely resulted from the widespread failure of non-Indigenous treaty people to hold up their responsibilities. And I would love if you would all introduce yourselves in the chat and share where you're joining us from today. I'd also like to share our African ancestral acknowledgement. We acknowledge that those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as the result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Before we get started, just a few tech considerations. After this webinar, you'll receive a full recording of the call, the slides, and some links and resources that we've shared. If you'd like to ask questions for our panelists, you can use the Q&A panel on your Zoom client. So that should be down at the bottom. It will either say Q&A or you might have to click the More button to see the Q&A. And if you need any technical support, please reach out to me. Again, my name is Mairead in the chat, and I can help you get everything sorted. We also have a few agreements we'd like to do today to create respectful virtual spaces. So when you come into the space today, you're agreeing to center equity, inclusion, and a sense of connection for all. Our responsibility and priority is to protect your safety and the safety of our guests today. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Justin, to introduce our wonderful panelists for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for starting us off so well, Mairead. And I just want to say that I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm going to try my best to stay out of the way as possible so that we can hear from David, Shannon, Nicole, and Michelle. But before I do that, I want to first highlight that today's webinar is also in partnership with the Institute for Collaborative Innovation, Global Advantage Consulting Group, Social Innovation Canada, and Tamarack. And that I'm personally really thankful for the partnership, both for this webinar, but also for just the ongoing conversations that we've had as a group to think about social innovation, community, and really what it means for driving forward Canada's innovation agenda in a way that centers community and ensures that we live in a country where everybody can be thriving. So I think that's, for me, something I'm really thankful for and part of this overall conversation for the webinar. So we're going to start with a presentation from David and Shannon. And just to sort of say, for me, part of what I'm really excited about is how much I've learned from David and Shannon over the last little bit because of their experience and sort of their wisdom. And as we were sort of waiting for and anticipating this this budget and conversations, really excited about, or we were really interested in seeing sort of what would come of it, especially because of sort of the state of where things are in the world, but also we'd just seen the Chief Public Health Officer report and the National Advisory Council on Poverty report that came out in October before the budget that highlighted the importance of community and the role that community plays in addressing things like well-being, poverty reduction, and such. So really excited about that. But more excited right now to hear what David and Shannon see from the budget. So I'll step out of the way and let you both go from there. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate the introduction. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that there were two groups of individuals that really combined together to develop this particular presentation. So my colleague Shannon and her terrific team of analysts, and then my particular group, we run a not-for-profit. The title of this is Meeting or Missing the Moment, and we phrase that as a question, and it's a question then for you to reflect on as we go through the presentation. Our own sense is that the moment was actually missed. We think there were a constellation of events that really created significant anxiety among Canada's population, just in terms of many of the traditional issues that you're very, very much aware of in terms of, affordability and social cohesion, combined then with the uncertainty of the Trump tariffs and the impact that was having on communities across the country. So when we look at the budget, we actually gave it a grading. We gave it a solid C minus. Um, and we'll explain that as we go through the budget presentation. Now, when you have a weak budget, this is the first budget of a new government. There are opportunities to improve it, and I think that's one of the things we want to focus on in terms of community engagement, in terms of trying to make these national programs a lot better. But I'll begin the sense of where we are, beginning actually right with the cover of the budget. So this is the cover of the budget, Canada Strong Budget 2025. I'm an ex-commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, and I looked at this ship and I thought, oh, gee, is that one of our ships? What I found out to my surprise, no, it's privately owned now from a Montreal family, but it was in part financed by Sumitomo Corporation of Japan, and it was made in Japan. So to me, I just question whether this is showing what Canada Strong actually means. I think there was a fundamental error that was made here in trying to show or illustrate this. And the issue really is we want to create jobs and employment opportunities for workers and communities across the country, not to be buying things necessarily from other countries. So to me, right away, just in terms of the cover of the budget got off to the wrong foot. Next slide, please, Sharon. Yeah, so I've had the fortune of and privilege of being inside the belly of the beast in Finance Canada. I've been engaged in contributing to the production of budgets on two occasions. One, I was responsible for privatization of Petro-Canada and Canadian National Railway, and then as Assistant Deputy Minister for Economic Development. So you get to have a sense as to how budgets are constructed. And then Shannon and I, pretty well every year for a long period of time, have done annual presentations on the budget. To make the budget, quite simple, if you go from the lower left up to the upper right, you begin by looking at past performance in terms of macroeconomic conditions and investments in the economy and society and so on. You then look at the present context. What are the issues that are challenging Canadians today? And then a budget's just simply a story about the future. It is about what do you think is going to happen? And in a sense, the Minister of Finance is like a fortune teller. He's got a crystal ball in front of him. He assesses all of the information, and he makes in a sense, a series of predictions, and he makes bets on those how much we're going to invest in various parts of the economy and society to actually address the challenges that are being faced. So that gives you the sort of a sense as to what a budget is. Next, please, Shannon. You really begin by looking at the global context, and I think the government actually did quite a good job of this. So they look at 5 areas of risk: economic risk, social risk, environmental risks, technological risks, and geopolitical kind of risks. From those risks, then you're looking at, well, what are the components of them? And then in particular, well, how are they going to impact Canadians? We're very much aware in terms of the economic risks, the tariff uncertainty, the trade uncertainty, supply chains being disrupted, still from COVID-19 and getting resettled, managing debt, possibility of a recession. But what does this mean for Canadians? I mean, this is where you get into issues of affordability of housing and food and plant closing, job losses, increased prices, interest rates, and so on and so forth. On the social risks, fragmentation, inequality, and what does this mean in terms of mental health issues that people are facing, and misinformation and disinformation? Global warming, we're just talking with some of the panelists just before this event about community adaptation to natural disasters. I mean, I live in a small community of about 200 people in Westmeath and on the Ottawa River, and the issue of the fires and the impact of that, your kids can't go outside, and the rising flood levels, helping your neighbors, sandbagging, and so on. These are issues that affect communities. Technological risks, safety, privacy, tech companies larger than union nations in dictating, how they will operate in various countries and the need for regulation in terms of AI and quantum computing and so on. And then finally, the geopolitical risk. We're all well aware of these, Trump, Russia, China, but then the impact on nationalism and the idea that we need to create resilience. And I think that resilience starts with resilient communities and making sure we can strengthen them. Next, please. Yeah, so here are two of my friends, Leo the lion and Lawrence the kitten. And if you look at Leo, the expectations of the budget, I mean, the advertising about this budget was extraordinary. This is going to be the most transformative budget, the largest and most significant budget since World War II. This will be intergenerational. Those expectations were built up, and I just have three quotes here. One in terms of millions are struggling to pay their rent, but put food on the table, and we're looking for a leaf in the budget, and they were disappointed. One of the most damaging was the Globe and Mail editorial board. The government's prevarication is so damaging. Interesting word, prevarication, comes very close to saying, certainly misleading. And then also the business community. What's interesting is then these expectations were built up significantly, and what was delivered was, less than promised. And I think that disconnect is the thing that we need to explore in terms of why that is. You'll also note in terms of these quotes here that if you have a budget that disappoints both the economic stakeholders and social purpose organizations, then you realize you really made a significant, you're off track in terms of responding to the needs of Canadians. Next slide, please. The issue of how big a budget is always raised, and this is something that Shannon and her team have produced over a long period of time. But these are all of the budgets of the Trudeau government, the Liberal government, the past 10 years. The one on the far right is the Carney budget. One of the things about budgets is they used to be only indicated over a 2-year period, and that's what we show here. Then someone got the idea, oh, the amount of activity we talk about is going to sound better if we put it over 5 years. But that's a mistake. You have a budget every year. And I would not believe those 5 years numbers. They get readjusted all the time, as they are in this budget in terms of reallocating funding. But what this does show is the COVID-19 response, the historical amounts of money to help firms and to help workers and to help citizens, get over this high period of unpredictability. I actually, in my view, think the Trudeau government got this right, that in general, spending that amount of money at such a worrisome and anxious time for people probably made a lot of sense. Still digesting the impacts of that. Next slide, please. The structure of the budget, and Shannon will be getting into this in more detail, but basically from top left to bottom right, it focuses on upstream investments. I mean, this is about building things, houses, major projects, infrastructure, building a new defense kind of capability. But it's all on the production side and upstream. It does create 10 new funds, like we're going to, change all public servants into bankers, 12 new strategies, 89 new initiatives, and there'll be 75 pieces of legislation that each has to get through the House. So this is an overloaded upstream kind of approach. The downstream area is where it benefits communities. And what are they concerned about? They're concerned about affordability of housing and food, security in terms of stability from shocks, accessibility for, healthcare, education, and employment, sustainability in terms of transition to a different energy economy, and social cohesion and equity, in particular issues about youth. So to connect those two, you've got to implement all of these upstream investments. But these are promises about what's going to happen tomorrow. It takes 10 to 12 years to develop a mine. All of these things are going to take a huge amount of effort over a long, long period of time, whereas communities are feeling and are anxious today in terms of the concerns that they have. So to me, there's missing the moment in terms of not responding effectively to them. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to take one issue in particular, the question here is, do we build new houses, which are things, or new homes, which are communities? And the three numbers here to really focus on is, according to CMHC, we need 4.8 million new houses. So I just looked at, well, how many people are in a house ballpark? And you got 2.9, that's the StatsCan figure. So you're talking about building houses for 13 million Canadians. But what Canadians want in those houses is connection, transportation, hospitals, schools, employment, telecommunication systems, police, fire, and ambulance services, and so on. I do not see that comprehensive view in the budget material or any of the other descriptions in terms of the government's approach on building new things. So I'm worried about that. I also looked at the cost to connect a house to a community. It's about 107K per house, according to Federation Canadian Municipality. That's a total cost of $513 billion. So are we doing enough here? Are we understanding what it takes? And then the issue, like, who's going to build these new houses? There are about 60 to 80 different trades involved. Have we assessed how many tradespeople we have, how many retiring, how many young people? Do we have the community colleges being financed to be able to support, these kinds of trades? Boy, I really question so much of that. Next slide, please, Shannon. Just continuing on with the theme of affordability on food. Apparently food bank visits are increasing in up to 90% since 2019. And I think everybody who goes shopping understands the increase in prices for many foods, and meat as being a luxury and so on and so forth. So we really don't see much, I don't think, to be able to address these kinds of issues. There are some good issues, though, actually in the budget. I actually think the middle class tax cut, which totals 27 billion, is a good feature. It saves about $420 per person. It's a slight reduction in the income tax rate from 15% down to 14%. But that kind of broad impact, there are 22 million Canadians that can take advantage of it, does have an impact. Then obviously there's specific things, the school food program, local food infrastructure funds, and so on. But the real issue is, do your kids and grandkids, feel that life is going to be more affordable? And when I talk to, sort of the people in my community, the answer is doubtful. Next slide, please. Do we invest enough in youth? Here's something that I really am quite concerned about. Youth unemployment rate is very, very high, almost 15%. And, it's 2.5, 3 times the sort of the normal rate for others in the population looking for work. So 463,000 youth looking for jobs. There are a lot of things in the budget, but they don't really get you a job. They're good, though. I mean, 100,000 youth will get, summer jobs. That's great. 20,000 youth have some challenges in finding jobs, mentorship, mental health. Great. That is good. 55,000, to access work integrated learning opportunities. That is good, but it doesn't give you a job. It leads and supports you trying to find that. And so when I look at the total amount of money, about 1.58 billion relative to the size of the budget, 141 billion, that's like 1.1%. And when I think of the fact that the youth cohort we're talking about are 5 million youth, 12% of our population, I just, are we doing enough for what has been called the intergenerational, investment that we're trying to make here? Well, if we're going to invest in a new generation, let's see it. And I just don't see it to the extent that I think is needed. Next slide. The community social sector, I'll talk just in the next slide about the Building Community Strong Fund. There are some very good features there. There are significant support, women and gender equity investments that are being made, and I think these are important. Some for seniors, perhaps more should be needed, and then some in terms of culture and targeted support, including some disability-focused initiatives. So there are elements there that are good, but the question is, do they really resolve the level of anxiety that people in our communities are feeling and responding effectively to it? Next slide, please. Yes, here's a slide just showing some of the investments that are going to be made. I mean, there's a fair amount of money that has been allocated in terms of a focus on communities. But this all has to be negotiated with provincial governments, and that's going to take a long period of time and be very, very complex. And to me, the question is, when I see components that are focused on hospitals and health facilities, which are important, infrastructure for colleges and universities, how much really is going to be left over for direct support in terms of communities? I don't know the answer to that. There isn't a clarity within that. This is all still to be negotiated. And I can just see this, taking a long period of time, but there are opportunities for communities to be engaged in terms of how that funding will ultimately be allocated. Next slide, please, Shannon. This is something that I really would like to emphasize. This is the central conceptualization of a study that was just released 2 weeks after the budget by the Council of Canadian Academies that were asked to look at the state of science, technology, and innovation in Canada. So that report was just released. There was an excellent job done by the leader of it, Ilse Troinik from Toronto. And at the heart of this was a new concept for the first time that was acknowledged as being central and key to the operation of a science, technology, and innovation ecosystem, and that is civil society is at the center of it. The civil society is defined as the network of organizations, communities, and citizens that operate outside governments and business to advance shared interests. And the key concept here, and I'll quote, innovation is not supported for its own sake, but instead is a means to achieve societal outcomes. I think that many of the organizations, most of the organizations on this call should build on this reconceptualization. This is new, and I believe it is transformative. A recognition that civil society is the core, it is the purpose for which you have science, technology, innovation. In short, it's why you grow an economy, to meet their needs. And the question then is, are you meeting the needs of our communities? Next slide, please. In part to look at the strength we think communities have, we did a little work to look at how many organizations, and these are all nonprofit corporations, that you could build upon to implement these government programs. So 35,000 of them, and on the left-hand side, social services, about 19,000, development and housing, you have culture and arts, environment for the total, and you have their allocation across the country, 9,000 plus in Quebec, 11,000, plus in Ontario, and so on and so forth. To me, this is a hidden strength. This is almost a fourth level of government. I actually did some initial work to look at all of the municipalities in Canada and their employment. How would the community-focused organizations compete? In my assessment, they're slightly larger. So 661,000 people employed in these 35,000 community organizations. I think this is a hidden capability because these organizations understand community. They understand, well, how do you build trust in a community? How do you engage in a community? So I see them as a bridging organization between these national programs and effectively having an impact on affordability, accessibility, security, sustainability, and social cohesion and equity. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon now to continue the discussion in terms of many of the other key aspects of the budget which can have an impact on the community. Shannon.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to get into the economic side of things a little bit. So this slide here highlights the 10 largest items in budget 2025, which is totaling around $125 billion over that 5-year period. So almost half of that 125 billion goes to defense. It's the biggest defense investment that we've seen in decades and shapes how much funding is available for other priorities. The next largest item here have direct impact on community and individuals. It's the middle class tax cut, tongue twister, and canceling the consumer carbon price tax gives families further availability of relief. Other measures are trade infrastructure strategy, removing GST, aim to boost economic activity and improve access to housing. So here is a similar slide, but we've taken out the tax measures. So when we remove tax measures, which are actually a savings that individuals have, but the government doesn't have to invest new money into that, the actual defense allocation is 67%. So this really here shows how big of an investment this budget is focusing on, and it really is targeted towards defense. So what we have here is our annual assessment of Canada's performance in research, development, and innovation. So we update this analysis every year, and we use the OECD data. So it's now spanning nearly 2 decades. And this graph is showing GERD as a percentage of GDP. So that really tells us how much of a country's economy is invested in research and development. Canada currently sits around 1.81%, and the OECD average sits at 2.70%. The gap here is large. To meet the OECD average, Canada would need to invest an additional $26.1 billion annually. So does this budget do enough to close or narrow Canada's long-standing research, development, and innovation gap? Direct R&D spending actually drops in budget 2025 to answer the previous question I just asked. So the budget here allocates $3.1 billion over 5 years for direct research, development, and innovation initiatives. That is a 62% decrease from budget 2024. So the largest item of that is the productivity super deduction. So that is a tax incentive. So firms can write off machinery, equipments, patents. It could help boost private sector investment in research and development, but that is really assuming that private sector firms have the capital to invest already. So there is some funding for AI, but only $125 million is new money. The rest was allocated previously in budget 2024. There are a few indirect measures that could influence research and development. The defense package includes major investments in digital systems, advanced technologies, and supply chains, which could create spillover for Canadian firms. There's the industrial strategy package, which includes programs such as the Strategic Response Fund, which is one of the few large-scale tools available for major research and development projects. But really overall here, the picture is clear. Direct research and development initiatives decline sharply, and national indirect measures will only deliver impact if they're tied to a coherent national strategy. So the budget allocates $1.7 billion over 13 years for the higher education sector, but the structure of these investments reveals a clear gap. Colleges and institutes are only mentioned once in the entire budget. None of that $1.7 billion is allocated toward them. This is a huge omission, given that colleges are often the primary post-secondary institution that are serving local communities. They drive applied research, community innovation, workforce development, and regional economic growth in ways that are tied to the local community needs. On the university side, the granting councils avoided the deeper 15% cut. However, with no inflationary adjustment, it means the real purchasing power declines. The International Talent Attraction Strategy adds 4 new funds to recruit global talent. These are notable steps, but they're unfold over long timelines and leave limited room for applied pathways that turn ideas into economic or social impact. Taken together, the picture here is mixed. The budget protects granting councils and supports talent attraction, but it does not invest in the college and institute system that anchors skills, training, and innovation capacity within communities. The immigration plan that was announced in Budget 25 signals a major shift in how Canada is going to use immigration over the next several years, much different to how we have previously. So permanent resident emissions will gradually decline from 395,000 to 370,000 by 2027. There's also plans for sharp reductions in temporary residence levels. There is a target to have the share of non-permanent residents down to less than 5% by 2027. And all of these changes really reflect the new framing. Immigration is going to be positioned as a tool to align direct with the labor market needs, pathways tied to clear skill shortages and will be prioritized, and pathways that fall outside this labor alignment will tighten. For post-secondary institutions, this is really going to affect colleges. Future enrollment and growth will depend on how quickly the program can align with the labor market demands. Programs are tightly connected to local and regional skills will need to be in the strongest position. Immigration will be more closely linked to labor force gaps, and communities that can connect training pathways to real workforce needs will be better able to attract and retain newcomers who contribute to local economies. This slide here highlights one of the key vulnerabilities in Canada's economy. This is our global merchandise export landscape. So as we can see here, 76% of our exports go to the US. In 2024, 76% was $591 billion. So that level of concentration is extremely risky and puts us at real exposure, especially during a time of trade tensions and tariff shifts right now. Early 2025 monthly data does show that we have a decline of our trading relationship with the US, and we're increasing trade with countries like China, the UK, and Japan. The core question here for policymakers is whether this budget provides enough tools to strengthen Canada's trade resilience and reduce exposure to such a concentrated export portfolio. So here are some of the measures to shield the economy from tariff pressures. In total, it's around $12.3 billion. The largest of that is this protecting workers and transforming Canada's strategic industry stream. We have supports for agriculture, fish, seafood. There's money for companies to grow and diversify, and helping ensure farms get accessing to finance. We also have this new Buy Canadian policy, which is going to aim to reduce dependency on foreign suppliers and strengthen domestic demand for Canadian goods and services. Along these measures, Budget 2025 also introduces several indirect measures that we'll get into in the next slide. So the budget has $4.4 billion over 5 years to help firms expand into new and diverse trade markets. The largest of that by far is the new trade infrastructure strategy. It represents the entire bottom of my screen here. So this strategy focuses on major export enabling infrastructure, ports, trade corridors, transportation systems, alongside infrastructure. The budget includes several targeted programs to support firms entering new markets. But the scale here is important. We exported around $780 billion of goods in 2024. So if we put that over a 5-year timeline, that's around $4 trillion. So if we're investing $4.4 billion, we're investing $1 for every $1,000 of goods that we export. So is that level of investment really enough to make a meaningful shift in Canada's trade trajectory and reduce our long-standing exposure to a single dominant market? Okay, so getting into defense, the largest item of the budget by far. So this is the largest defense and security investment in decades. It commits $81.8 billion over 5 years to rebuild, rearm the Canadian Armed Forces. Funding spanned areas such as personnel, infrastructure, digital systems, military capabilities. The scale here really is striking. It represents 80% of our last defense spending commitments, but it compressed into a 5-year window instead of 20. This investment moves Canada towards NATO's updated targets, including a path to 3.5% of GDP for core defense by 2035. National defense depends on strong and resilient communities, which is why organizations like Tamarack, Georgian College, Vibrant Communities Calgary become essential partners in ensuring these investments translate into local well-being and long-term economic strength. Analysts such as David Perry at CAGI have mentioned that there's no really year-by-year comparison of this $81.8 billion investment. So we're going to need to see in the weeks to come. Hopefully they'll be releasing the new defense strategy, and I've heard that it's pretty impressive. So we'll have an idea of where that money is actually going to be invested. So overall, this really is a historic investment, but the key challenge here is going to be execution. And the question is, what should Canada do next to ensure these investments in defense and the broader economy actually deliver the outcomes Canadians need, including the impact on communities? So if we go to the next slide, Dave's going to speak to that, and then we'll turn it over to discussion shortly.
Terrific. Thanks, Shannon. So this is the last slide, and to try and summarize, a very, very complex document. I think what we've tried to show is, there are many, positive features of the approach the government is taking, but overall, it seems to miss the moment in terms of the level of anxiety and emotional concern that many people in communities do have. The investments will take a long time to produce results. So how do you deal with these challenges in the interim? One of the things as well is that these are plans, and as Shannon just pointed out, I mean, the whole issue is execution, and we haven't seen the execution, the timetables, the kind of approach, the processes, the consultations that this government wants to make. And I think there are opportunities then for the communities across the country, beginning, for example, even on the question of defense, defending against what? We need to look at defense in a very, very broad-based concern. Should it be defense against higher prices? Should it be defense against, the lack of social cohesion, of inequity? These are the broader concepts of defense that I think are relevant today. And we need to look at how we can use and shape that concept of defending against what in terms of a broader impact really on Canadians across the country. So what's the way ahead for community-based organizations? To me, one is offer to help. It is a weakish kind of budget, and I think the government is going to need a lot of help in terms of implementing. Um, they don't know communities the way in which your organizations have detailed understanding over a long, long period of time and track records of how you build trust and how do you engage communities in terms of implementing some of these national objectives. So I think there are real opportunities. There's a new cabinet committee on wellness and quality of life that I think one needs to take advantage of. There are new initiatives in terms of trying to replace GDP with quality of life measures that obviously all have an impact on communities, and we need to explore that. So that's number one, offer to help. Number two is show. And what I mean by that is, yeah, I always remember, I think it was either in kindergarten or grade one, you'd have show and tell, and we are all so proud to be there. And, if your dad was a fireman, you might have a helmet or something. And if a policeman, you'd have a badge and, showing, what your dad did and so on and so forth. In terms of show here, it's for the community-based organizations. Who are you? Where are you located? Who do you serve? What benefits do you provide collectively? So it's shaping that 35,000 organizations that are corporate into a structure to show who you are. Then the third element is tell. So telling them how you can help them in terms of bridging the higher level production things that need to be translated into community activity and the capacity and the capability that you've got. And at the same time, then what you need to do the job better. What kind of support, what kind of funding would be helpful, and funding in what way to be able to achieve those results. Final element is working together as a community of interested organizations. I was very privileged to attend the Victoria Forum this past summer. And at the beginning of it, in terms of setting the stage, one of the Indigenous leaders was asked, well, what do we need to do? And he came up with two words, which are so simple and so profound. He said, we just need to work together. And it really is as simple and as complex as that. And so when I think of these 35,000 community-based organizations, you can think of 35,000 fingers. Well, you can all act on your own, or you can join together and form one fist. I think the fist will have much more capacity in terms of having an impact. And I think the experience is there to be able to make that kind of contribution to these national objectives. So with that, thank you very much, Justin, and over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much,
I just want to
David.
jump in quickly. So sorry, Justin,
It's okay.
but we just have a quick question in the chat. Someone was asking if they could see the slide featuring community organizations shown again, the one with the numbers across Canada.
Sure. Ken?
Sure. 1 second.
Perfect. Well,
Thank
Shannon,
you so much.
all right. Well, Shannon, explain that. The other question that came up in the chat, just so I can confirm, was around sharing your slides afterwards. Just confirm that that's okay with both of you, but I'm seeing a nod, so I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. And so thank you both so much for that. I just want to say a couple things before I pass it, before I turn to Nicole and Michelle. But one that I think is, because it was also in the chat, that I'll just mention, that there's the Quality of Life and Wellbeing Committee of Cabinet. And so I think someone shared the link. Interesting things about this one that I think are worth noting, and David sort of highlighted. One is the government has created the Quality of Life framework. I think it still needs, it's there, and there's lots of information that can be used by communities. I think in that terms of how we can show and be helpful in ways that also help the community sector is around how does the government turn that into something that's really meaningful. And I think the StatsCan, as a part of their strategy, has some work on the Quality of Life framework upcoming, which can be sort of really valuable for communities to get involved with. And as well, we were talking about right before the webinar started with the panel, but The minister who leads that cabinet, community and quality of life and well-being, resigned. So they need a new chair. And as chairs come into committees, into cabinet, that gives an opportunity for the sector to help them integrate into that role, and being helpful to them is a way that can be helpful to us. So I just wanted to flag those two things. I have some other stuff later, but I'm going to save it so that I can hear from Nicole and Michelle first. So I'm going to turn to Nicole first. So Nicole, as the Director of Social Innovation at Georgian College, you've led innovative solutions to community challenges with local partners, such as the Future of Belonging project, which I got to look at from just helping set up the webinar, and I'm just so excited. I think it's such a cool project. You've also highlighted the important role that colleges play as vital intermediaries in community change and community innovation. So I'm really interested to see your thoughts on the budget and what you think it means for colleges, but also the role that they play in community change, because I think it is really important. And as sort of David and Shannon highlighted, not necessarily supported the way that it should be in the budget. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the budget is really interesting to me. I have a conflict between knowing what the global politics are all about and why Carney probably did what he did and the way he looked at it and his background. And then there's the Canadian in me, and being in the social sector and working with community, and also sort of flagging, this isn't going to work. um, and what I mean by that is, so like sitting from the perspective of a community college where we're, facing some challenges right now, and a lack of understanding, or maybe a lack of a value, uh, the invisible value that a college plays in a community. So often we talk about universities, kind of being the seat of research and all those things. And yes, 100%. But then there's this idea that colleges actually is there's not a sector, or there's not an area of a community that the college doesn't touch. We produce the plumbers, we produce the social service workers, we produce the law clerks, like we have degrees and we have diplomas. But at the end of the day, when I think about the budget that Carney has placed down, and maybe the misunderstanding of how place-based innovation is going to prop this budget up. And I think about, sort of Nordic countries and how they understand that, social infrastructure is actually good economics. This ability to not fund intermediaries, or the lack of understanding about the role that an intermediary organization, like say a YMCA or a community college, plays, particularly in rural and more remote communities. This misnomer understanding about how a community innovation ecosystem actually works. It's not the same as an industry innovation ecosystem, and it's definitely not the same as an entrepreneurship ecosystem. It's much more complex and nuanced, and you're right. It needs to remain relevant. And I think what's happening is that we're losing sight in this budget where relevancy for the things that the budget wants to achieve are going to come from the communities that see relevance in it. So for instance, if you are an LGBTQ organization or group, the relevancy for you to participate in community is your access to healthcare, or your access to safe education. So these are some of the things I think that get overwritten. And certainly with the amount of money that's going into defense, that concerns me from an equity owed perspective, but I also understand it from a geopolitical perspective. But as a college, I think the best thing that we can do is kind of is to present models where it's easy for people to understand how to work together. So that idea of working together, one thing that a college can do is convene. And we have an expertise around youth, but we also have an expertise around workforce development. We have an expertise around training and upskilling. And I think sometimes we're not asked to come to the table enough to have those conversations. So that's sort of a broad overlay, but from where I sit, I think that funding intermediaries is a missed opportunity, And whatever that intermediary is in the budget, I think it's going to be pivotal to achieving what they're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you. I agree. Yeah. And I'm going to turn in a second to the whole panel to keep talking about that one because I think there's lots of really good points. But I'm going to first introduce Michelle. Michelle, Vibrant Community Calgary highlighted important investments from the federal budget, including an income support and benefit programs, affordable non-market housing, the school food program, some pieces around youth employment and the youth employment and skill strategy, and the auto tax filing. Just reading from your thing, but how important are these investments for getting back on track for Canada's poverty reduction targets, which we've slipped on? And what else is needed to support the work happening in communities around the end of poverty in Canada?
Yeah, I just briefly share what Vibrant Communities Calgary does for those who aren't familiar. So we're a very local organization here in Calgary. We work to address the root causes of poverty in Calgary through systems change, and we do that through funding through the City of Calgary as a civic partner to steward Calgary's poverty reduction strategy through community. And that's called Enough for All, which you can see in my background. To answer your question, though, and I'll just build on what David and Nicole have just said. I would say, you know, as a local organization, we were so pleased to see those lines just maintained in the budget, right? I don't think that this was a generational investment in poverty reduction. And so speaking to getting back on track for poverty reduction targets, I'm not sure it does that, but it certainly at least if those programs were eliminated, then we would be in a real dire situation. So I will just say that. Certainly, initiatives like auto tax filing, for example, is something that we've advocated for a long time. That will certainly unlock income for low-income Canadians that would absolutely mean the difference between crisis and stability. And so we're so pleased to see that. In terms of, what else is needed, I will say too, as an Albertan, I think my analysis here is going to be colored a little bit by my local context. But I think what we are really looking to see too is that other orders of government just come to the table with these initiatives as well. In Alberta, especially, some of these programs are really difficult to implement when we have a provincial government who's also kind of working with their own agenda on, sovereignty and provincial jurisdiction and all of these things. And we see that trickle down to Calgarians living in poverty. So we see a lot of uncertainty. We see a lot of people falling through cracks in the implementation of these policies, and we can kind of anticipate that as funding from this budget flows through, that we'll probably see more of that. So that is really what we are looking for locally, is that cooperation between all orders to make sure that actually at the end of the day, your Calgarian living in poverty gets the benefit from those investments.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to turn to everybody now for the panel to chat, but I'm going to sort of say sort of some of the things that I see coming across the conversation that I think are really important. Part of it is that there's that vital role that, especially in place, intermediaries play for the convening, the bringing together, and I think also sense making, both what's happening locally, but also taking in sort of like translating up to government, but also translating what we see happening in government to that local context. And then I would say, tied into that, Michelle's last comment there, the importance of joined up change and working cross scale and cross sector and also cross scale, that from local and community, both in terms of organizations, but also municipalities, to provincial / territorial and the federal government, how those all come together, I think are really important. And even when thinking about the budget and it coming in at that in a really interesting context, it's only one part, right? And it's the next important piece is how do we respond to the budget in a way that's going to bring forward the things that are really important. David highlighted that, there's 661 plus individuals that are working across the nonprofit sector in Canada. The National Advisory Council on Poverty in its last report really highlighted that both in terms of the formal support that's offered from social service organizations, but also the informal supports that people see in poverty is really crucial for helping people to exit poverty, and also have a sense of belonging and connection. And so I think those are amongst the sort of the discussions that the sector needs to think about as it raises its profile for how it can engage and be involved in that, and go from there. I'm going to turn to see if there's anything from comments that have been made that anybody in the panel wants to bring up. If not, I got more things, but yeah.
So Justin, are you looking for questions that have come in, or can we comment on anything?
Comment first, and then I'll go to questions right afterwards. Yeah, I've got some questions, but I want to give you a chance to respond to each other too.
So two quick things. One is in terms of the community college, I couldn't agree more. I've been involved over the years with CICAN in terms of getting them more money. The federal government should be giving 6-7 times as much funding as they do now to the colleges. There's no question about it. Colleges are totally integrated into the community. I mean, your reference in terms of all of the trades and skills and service providers and so on. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. And then I have a particular interest in terms of innovation. So the applied research that the colleges kind of offer, these are linked in to meet real needs in the community. It's not the abstract, we're all going to win Nobel Prizes in physics and science, and chemistry and so on and so forth. So yeah, we're missing the boat on that. And I realize, the issue in terms of immigration and the financial kind of constraints, but we need to get over that and look at the profile of where these colleges are located. Like we have one in Pembroke. Okay, I'm in Westmeath, a little town of 200 here. And in terms of the skilled trades, that's what you depend upon. And, they're under constraints now in terms of what they can offer. So I just totally build on that. The other thing, though, just to maybe communicate, is that one of the things we're depicting here in terms of the budget is part of a longer term movement. The ability of governments in general, federal and provincial and municipal, are extraordinarily limited and diminishing. They are not going to be able to deliver the kinds of initiatives and services that people have expected in the past. Municipalities don't have the resource base to be able to pick up the slack, and yet what we're demanding of them is so absolutely stunning. So there's going to be a power shift, to me, down towards a decentralized approach, and that centers on building resilient communities. The question is, are communities collectively, these 35,000 corporations, are they ready to accept more capacity, more power? To me, that's the big question. And to me, that final issue that the Indigenous leaders said, you got to work together. Are communities prepared to work together to share their, individual rights and maybe sacrifice them a little bit and build up a collective responsibility? To me, that's the central open question that I think needs to be discussed in future. I can see everybody agrees.
Yeah. I'll turn to see if any other of the panel wants to comment on. But one thing I'll say is I agree, and it fits well within some of the Q&A questions that are around how do we access and approach government to this conversation, and how do we combine up the social sector, which David, you and I have spent lots of time talking about ways that we can do this. So I think that fits into that, the sector needing to take on a part of that responsibility, but also find ways to organize together to be sort of that movement towards government, sort of recognizing the role that they play. And Nicole has their hand up, so I'm going to pause in a second. But I just say the other thing that we have to recognize when we have this conversation is that the sector is, like the community sector, is already stretched very thin, and the resources to the sector, especially from government, but also from philanthropy, are not keeping up pace with the needs of the community that have been added on. So if those responsibilities are downloaded, so does the capacity that needs to also go to the community sector too. And I've talked a lot, so I'm going to turn to Nicole.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment on power, and I was gonna make a comment on innovation and the community sector. Um, the solutions we need are already out there, just by the very fact that the equity owed groups that are most affected by these inequitable systems are already having to hack their well-being. And if we would just listen and then use our power or where we sit in the system to move the system out of the way, we don't have to do anything except for make those pieces allowed to come to the surface or brought together. I don't, we talk about innovation, we talk about having to create all these new, like, we don't have to. It's already there because the person that is trying to survive in these systems that are not necessarily built the way they should be has the solution. We just need to listen to it, and we need to understand how to integrate lived experience into policy design, into organizational development, into collective strategic planning. And that's not a capacity issue, that's a power issue, like you said, David. And as soon as we can get over ourselves and recognize that that all work together piece is really about actually getting out of the way, we don't need a lot of money to do that. And that's how, who was said here? How do we become one fist instead of 35,000 fingers? Is everybody does their part to make sure that those innovations rise to the surface. And sometimes you're not leading them. Sometimes you're getting out of the way. Um, so
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that, Nicole. We have started a research project in mental health. And, we work at VCC to really listen and include voices of lived experts in our poverty reduction work. But even for us, this was a shift of actually recognizing at the start of this research project, like, oh, we've actually heard from lived experts, specifically in mental health, about what they need changed in the system for a very long time. And so we shifted our approach from solution development, because we have the solutions, you're absolutely right, to actually addressing what are actually the systemic barriers. And we're going to work on those instead to have those solutions rise to the top. So it is a change in approach for us in our research as well. But I think this is absolutely, you're right, the way that we need to work forward.
Just one comment. One of the areas that we're um, in terms of my not-for-profit, the core of it actually three young people. They're just recent grads. In fact, two of them are still working on their master's degree. And what we've learned from them, it's just kind of remarkable in terms of talent and capability. And we've started some initiatives with research money and the Canada Science Policy Centre to focus on youth. And we're thinking of the idea of a youth summit. The challenges that they are facing, the way in which they are looking at the world is just so different from other generations. And to me, there's a huge issue here that I don't know how to expand and explore. And I know the community groups have got all kinds of initiatives centered on that. So in terms of the movement and building on your point, Nicole, about getting out of the way a little bit and permitting these groups to find a voice well, not find a voice, to achieve a voice and have an impact. How do we do this for youth? I mean, to me, that's a subset of a broader set of issues affecting the community, but one because they are the next generation. They are the ones that are going to come up with solutions to these things. So how can we focus on trying to do that better?
Absolutely. And I think, I think getting out of the way and ensuring that people have the resources, I think is really key and crucial. And I think that's really important. And the last thing I'm going to say is, because it's 1 o'clock, so I've kept us a little bit extra. I apologize for that. The last thing I'm going to really highlight, because one of the things that we did talk about is the opportunities to sort of improve the budget and think about the future and that. And I want to highlight one before we go. And that's that ESDC, the Employment Social Development Canada, as a part of its youth employment and skills strategy, because there was funding in the budget, both to maintain and to potentially increase a little bit of it. They're doing their review, and it is there's a survey that's open with a discussion paper for people to provide feedback on. Tamarack is sharing with communities, and we're going to be responding as well. But I highlight that these are also opportunities to go beyond the survey for organizations and see this as an opportunity because you know that the department and the minister is thinking about it, and to take that extra step to think about ways to get involved and use that as a door to sort of to step in and talk about and be helpful to members of the government. So when we send out the recording for this, I'll also share the link to that so that folks can find ways to participate, because I think it is a really important moment to think about how to tie in across the board, whether it be climate and good jobs and employment, youth skills, et cetera. This is, I think, an area that the community sector could be jumping in and adding thoughts to. So I'll make sure I share that. Beyond that, thank you all so much. This has been a really thoughtful conversation and a really important one as we think about ways that the community sector can be engaging more with the federal government, but also responding to the budget. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, my colleague Shannon, and thank you, Justin, for the privilege of permitting us to make a presentation. Hope it helps.
Thank you all.